When talking about video games, we like to go for the extremes, being people's favorites and least favorites. What can be said, it makes an impact, like a firm handshake. Personally, when I meet somebody, I give them the old hi. My name is Who Cares? What are your top 5 consoles of all time? And don't forget the of all time part, because when it comes to time, whoa, that's a lot of it. Naturally, some people have a hard time coming up with their top 5. I mean, this is some heavy stuff. Yeah, why don't you ask somebody to pick who their favorite child is while you're at it? I tried to pick out my favorite bread bag clip from my bread bag clip collection one time, and yeah, I didn't have the heart to do that. All right, between you and me, it's my red with a yellow sticker. What I find interesting too is that it can oddly feel like you're condemning a console by not putting it in your top 5. Like it somehow means you don't like it as much as you do. If I put the Sega Genesis in my top 5 but not the Sega Dreamcast, how are things between me and my Dreamcast ever supposed to be the same again? I mean, it's already got abandonment issues. I kind of think of it like this. So I love the Dreamcast. Like, oh my goodness, do I love that thing. But I love the Genesis enough to cross the 7 seas and fight off sharks. Whereas with the Dreamcast, I'd cross 6 seas for it, maybe 7. But then when it came to fighting off the sharks, I'd think part of the food chain, baby. At least they can't bite my memories of Crazy Taxi in half. When thinking of something as being top 5 worthy, sometimes the numbers just don't line up with how you feel about each of the candidates. Something being top 5 is almost like a state of mind. I've had days where I wake up feeling good and think, I'm feeling like a top 5 kind of person today. But then come to think about the world population and yeah, the odds aren't looking too good. So with all that said, since 5 seems limited, I'd like to start with an honorable mention, the Nintendo GameCube. Oh, and just a quick FYI, I'm not going to be factoring in backwards compatibility for my choices. But anyways, the GameCube is a console I just assumed would be in my top 5 until I had to actually make the list. I mean, you'd think a console I own a stool for would be in the top 5, and this thing has been through the grinder, aka my GameCube playing caboose. You'd also think a console that I've named would be in the top 5. That's right, I named my GameCube and its name is Guffy. Guffy the GameCube. Guff and I are the best of friends. We just get each other, you know? As some of you might be used to by now, I like to talk about how I wish the GameCube was appreciated more back in the day. I'll never forget what people would say to me for choosing GameCube back then. One of my better choices back then, just ask my old hairdo. Okay, and now on to number 5, the Nintendo 64. What the heck? I know, not everybody loves it, but there are some people who do, and one of those people is me. When I thought about it, it simply had to be on here for me. I think my explanation for why I have such fondness for it will make sense to you, even if you're one of the many who hate it, kinda like my PlayStation. When I had Nintendo 64, local multiplayer was king, and specifically 4-player multiplayer, something the console really emphasized and I think is great for to this day, if you have the right friends for it. Speaking of which, when I was a kid, all my friends also had Nintendo 64. We were constantly playing multiplayer games together. This was always such a blast. Why did we ever stop? Ah, that's right, we got better stuff to do nowadays. Now, a lot of people will tell you that most people who had a Nintendo 64 all had the same 5 to 10 games, and this is generally brought up as a criticism, but what I can tell you is that, yeah, pretty much everyone had Mario Kart, and everyone had Super Smash Bros. Even games like Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Party, all my friends had. The benefit was that these games were basically a way of life for all of us. More important than our upcoming math test was learning how to turn more effectively in the hovercraft in Diddy Kong Racing. So because these games were life for us, everyone was at least moderately good at them, which made for much better multiplayer sessions, avoiding the issue where some of the people playing aren't very good, making for lopsided competition, which always just sucks the fun out of it for me. Yeah, not everyone is like my friend's cousin Eddie who would bring over games we'd never heard of before, like War Gods that he'd mastered and was eager to destroy us at, and then be a sore winner about. Oh, that Eddie, I tell ya. Although I did rent a lot of the less talked about games back then, stuff like Chameleon Twist and Mischief Makers. Gosh, did I love that game and still do. The Nintendo 64's lesser talked about games don't always get as much credit as I think they deserve, but the more well-known games on the console sure do, many of which are some of my favorite games of all time, so that certainly helps its case for me. Next on the list, we have the PlayStation. That's right, the original PlayStation. A console I didn't really play much back in the day. You know what? I'm saying nice things about you now. You don't need to be rude. The PlayStation is a console I've done my best over the years to make up for missing out on as a kid, and boy oh boy have I been rewarded. I don't really regret not playing it back in the day because it's been such a treat to play it as an adult. Plus, it's been mostly single-player games I've enjoyed as an adult, which, yep, plenty of opportunity for that. Although, I gotta say, even as an adult, I've had a bit of resistance over the years to playing it due to its reputation for ugly early 3D games, but I've found that a lot of the early 3D games have their own special charm, some of which use pre-rendered backgrounds that I enjoy the look of. And there are a ton of great 2D games for the system on top of it. These are some of my favorites. The more I play this system, the more my opinion of it seems to go up. And what's interesting is that I don't even necessarily have an absolute favorite game for it, just a lot of games that I really enjoy. When I think about it, I'm just a sucker for 90s gaming. Speaking of which, next console on my list is the Sega Saturn. Granted, I'm a sucker for Sega as well, but I just love everything about this console. Its emphasis on 2D games, its emphasis on arcade-style games, the unique Sega-developed games, how it's got one of the best feeling power buttons to click. Ooh-wee, is that a sweet one. The Sega Toss Santro advertising campaign from Japan where kids would get beaten up for not playing Saturn, a little more hands-on than my get-on-my-lawn approach, but I can appreciate this spirit. This console was actually one of my very early purchases when I finished college, and when I would argue the real education began. I mean, sure, I had a blast playing video games in the 90s, but between the Saturn and the PlayStation, the attitude on this one today. Anyways, between the Saturn and PlayStation, there was so much stuff I had missed, to the point it almost scares me that I could have missed all of it had I not gone back to check. What else could I be missing? See? You never know. Gotta tell ya, finding all these treasures I missed really cemented my love for the hobby of retro gaming. Way too many good games from the past to just ignore it and only play newer games. But with that said, it's now time to get to my number one console, which may have you wondering, how do you get to number one if you haven't said what number two is? Well, you may not like this, but my number one is a tie between two systems, the Acorn Archimedes and another Acorn Archimedes. Nah, it's a tie between the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. Believe me, I've tried to pick between the two of them before, but I just can't say I like one more than the other. So I thought I'll write it down, but a part of me tried to wriggle out of making a decision, but I was determined. Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis? I need an answer. There we go. Aha! Oh, come on. Forever rivals in what I'd call the greatest console rivalry there ever was and ever will be. Like yin and yang, these consoles are the perfect complements to each other for me. Naturally, a lot of it comes down to the style of games. I love the 16-bit era, but what's interesting about that is I would not have told you that as a kid. I just didn't quite get them. I still enjoyed myself, sure, but nowhere near as much as I do now. Most of the games were way too difficult for me, partly because I was so young, but partly because I think I just wasn't that good at games, even for my age. Plus, there were so many notable games I had never even heard of back at the time, and an even longer list of games I never played. There was actually a large period of time when I thought Mega Man was just a fighting game because the only thing I had seen was the Power Battle arcade game at my local ice rink. So, sure, I grew up with the 16-bit generation technically, but it really was more of a discovery as an adult when I truly appreciated it. I actually thought the Nintendo 64 was my favorite console ever for the longest time. I still like that console, I mean it's number 5, but after putting the proper amount of time into everything else, I like a few other consoles more. Alright, so there we go, that's my top 5. As you might have noticed, it probably differs from your top 5, of which I'd like to hear. I think the point of sharing a top 5, for me at least, isn't to hope that somebody has the exact same choices as you, but rather to appreciate what somebody else's experience has been. It gets me super excited to see somebody share how much passion they have for a console or game, regardless of how much I like it personally. So feel free to share what your top 5 is, share your thoughts on mine, or both. Leave your comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video. Alright. I know that having my number 1 console as a tie simply won't stand for some of you. So, I'm taking a real deep breath, and my favorite console is Game Boy Pocket with a missing battery cover.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games.